What's up, APUSH gang? We are back again for another video, and we are finally to the good stuff. Here we are, World War II, what we've all been waiting for. And before we get started, I have two announcements, two ways that you could help me. It would mean a lot. First, Bear does not have a prom date, so if you are an eligible bachelorette and you want to send your portfolio, your profile in to me, because Bear, he's being a little difficult, and we really want him to get a prom date. So if you're willing to go with Baird, I know it's not great, but just hit me up, holla at your boy, and I'll get back to you. If you look like Sydney Sweeney, that is ideal. If not, of course, beggars can't be choosers. Second, I am running for senior class president, and I would be forever indebted if you guys were to vote for me and elect me senior class president. It would be pretty rad. Sounds fun. I would have a great time doing it. And yeah, if the only way you ever pay me back for these videos is by voting for me, that is more than enough, and I thank all of you in advance for those who do. And now, let's finally get into the good stuff. Here we go. We got World War II. We got learning targets thanks to Connor Kramer down in the description, as well as the practice test key, and my newsletter. It's all fire, and let's get into it. All right, here we are. Let us start off with the 4 freedoms, and these are basically just the 4 human rights that FDR believes in. These are the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship or freedom of religion, freedom from want, which basically just means all of your needs will be met, like housing, water, etc. And then freedom from fear, primarily from government. Like you won't be afraid that the government's going to come steal all your stuff, you won't be afraid of repression, etc. So yeah, that's the cornerstone of FDR's domestic policy, his values, his foreign policy, all of that. The 4 freedoms. That's huge. And then America recognizes the Soviet Union in 1933. This is for 2 main purposes. First, for economic reasons, they wanted to trade because the Soviet Union had a little bit of bread, and also because they wanted to counter growing fascist regimes, which obviously did not end up working because Hitler and Mussolini. So, but it was an attempt. The good neighbor policy. So this is basically just America taking all of its military bases and military forces out of Latin America and bringing them back into the domestic United States. And they leave Latin America all to its own affairs because they want Latin America to like them. They kind of sense that there's a little bit of trouble in the water, and they're saying, just in case something like a war breaks out, we want to make sure that Latin America likes us, and we want them to be on our side. And so it's like if a neighbor just rolled a tank into your backyard, you'd be a little pissy at them. But there's nothing you can do about it because they have a tank and you don't. And this is America taking their tank, bringing it back. That way their Latin American neighbors like them a little bit more. Like countries like Haiti, America withdrew all of its forces. And then sure enough, a war did roll around, and none of the Latin American countries sided with the Axis power, so it did work. And then there's the reciprocal trade agreement. This is basically saying everyone's reducing tariffs. If you reduce tariffs on us, we'll reduce tariffs on you. This fosters international trade, and it's great for everybody. Everyone likes it. And then there's reasons for isolationist sentiment. So after World War I, everyone hated it. They were like, that sucks. And then the Great Depression happened. And now that sucked and everyone's poor. And it's just not a great time in general. And people are thinking about another war. And they're like, well, then we're just going to get poorer and more people are going to die. It just seemed, they were like, we don't want anything to do with that. They are a whole ocean away. We'll let them do their own thing. And yeah. And then sure enough, World War II rolls around. And they don't go in at first, but after a little while, they do in fact go in. And then the U.S. policy during the invasion of China, so Japan invades China, invades Manchuria, and America keeps its neutrality. Everyone wants to be isolationist. FDR keeps us isolationist. He condemns it. He's like, that's a bad thing. He puts a little bit of economic sanctions on them, but nothing for real. And then there's the Nye Committee. And this is a Senate investigation led by Senator Nye, and it examined this led increased isolationist sentiments because it discovered that one of the big motivations for joining World War I was that the arms companies would make a lot of profit off it, and apparently that was factored in, and everyone got pissed off that part of the reason why we joined the war was because a lot of these companies would make a lot of profit. And so yeah, that was more boosting isolationist sentiments, saying war is bad, war is just for profit, etc., etc. And then there's the Neutrality Acts of 1935, 1936, and 1937. So these are banning arms sales and banning loans to countries that are at war. They reflect sort of America's isolationist sentiment, trying to stay out of everything. And yeah, Neutrality Acts, they're Neutrality Acts. Keep America neutral. U.S. policy during the Spanish Civil War, once again, we stay neutral, not really doing anything. You know, we're still, like, we're kind of hating on Germany. We're condemning what Germany's doing, but we aren't actually doing anything interventionist. The first intervention you really see is after Germany invades Poland and Great Britain and France declare war. That's when we actually start loaning out stuff. That's like the turning point, if you will. And now we're actually getting to the outbreak of World War II, and we start with sort of like the prelude, which is like the Munich conference where Hitler's like, hey, Britain, France, Italy, let's come have a conference in Munich. Look, I'm just trying to unite all the German speakers. I'm not trying to start a big war. Just let me do my thing. Let me get all my Germans. And he's like, look at all these people who speak German in Czechia. I just need to go and take Czechia because they already speak German. They're already basically German. Just let me take that. And Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, Prime Minister of Britain, he has this philosophy called appeasement where you just give dictators whatever they want to avoid a bigger war. And he's like, yeah, you can have Czechia as long as you promise not to invade the rest of like the world. Like, just don't take the rest. You can have Czechia and then don't take anything else. You can't take the Slovakia part of Czechia. They don't speak German. You can take the Sudetenland, you can take Czechia, nothing else. And Hitler's like, okay, done deal. I'll take Sudetenland and I won't take anything else. And Neville Chamberlain flies back to Britain. He's like, I stopped World War II. Hitler's just taking Sudetenland. We're going to be great. And then they're like, oh, and he's invading Slovakia and Poland. And it's like, well, crap. So yeah, that wasn't very good. Oh, and guys, this appeasement thing, totally not happening somewhere else in the world right now. A foreign dictator trying to return its country back to former glory by taking land that used to be its own, not happening right now. Gosh, who would draw parallels in history? Anyway, and then there's the Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, which is basically in World War I. You remember how they had all these big lines and they would just like shoot at each other in these lines? Hitler was like, what if instead of just like staring in parallel lines, we turn our line like this and we just go straight through their line? And that's basically what the Blitzkrieg is. Turn your line like this, concentrated attack at one point, go take the capital, bada bang, bada boom. That's what the Blitzkrieg is. It's super effective. Took down France, Poland, all that in like literally a month. So yeah, Blitzkrieg, lightning fast attack. Neutrality Act of 1939. This is America's revised version because now there's a war going on. And they're like, all right, we're still going to stay neutral except we can give out arms shipments to Britain and France, to the Allies. But the only time when you're allowed to sell arms is through cash and carry, which is if the Allies pay in cash and then they carry their goods from America back to Britain and France. So, you know, the Brits would have to sail a boat over, bring their cash, give the cash to the Americans, take the guns, and they would have to ship the guns over to Britain. So that's cash and carry. And then the effect on the U.S. economy is it boomed, baby. We're getting ready for that wartime economy. It's sort of like the preparation stage, but this sort of starts to help bring us out of the Depression and is overall a good thing for our economy. And then there's the Battle of Britain of 1940. And let me tell you, these Brits put in the work. For like 70 days straight, they went into bunkers every single night while the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, went and raided overhead. And the RAF, the British Air Force, was outnumbered like 5-1. And yet, every night, they were so brave, those cute little Brits, and they went up and they defended their homeland. And after like 70 days of nonstop air raids, the RAF managed to push the Luftwaffe back, and Britain was saved. If the Battle of Britain had been lost, it would have hit Germany, in all likelihood, could have won the war. So super huge out of the Brits. We love to see it, and in no small part due to the shipments from the American, but obviously the bravery of Winston Churchill and all the RAF pilots, and just the people of Britain in general. So yeah, that's the start of the World War II, and now we can get into the American part, the fun part. I actually lied to you. We have to talk about one little boring section about foreign policy, and then we get into the good stuff. Starting with interventionists versus isolationists. So the interventionists are saying, hey, we should go get in the war, go actively help the Allies because Germany is obviously a threat to our national security. And the isolationists are like, I really don't want to get in a war. They're on the other side of the world. Let's just chill here. So that's what's going on there. Then there's the American First Committee, or might as well call it the Nazi First Committee because they're just Nazis. They were saying that America should focus on itself, not focus on the Allies because they don't want to get dragged into a war with Britain. But they were super anti-Semitic and yeah, bad everything. Election of 1940, this is FDR running for a third term. after he dies, they switch it, so he's allowed to run for as many as he wants at this point. Ran for a third term, beat this Republican guy named Wendell, and his victory reflected the public confidence in A, his leadership, and B, the growing support for helping the Allies, not necessarily getting into war, but for actively supporting the Allies. One of the ways he did this is through the Lend-Lease Act, and this is super important. This is the sort of the turning point where America turns from being neutral to actively helping the Allies. This is offering France and Britain with immediate arms. They don't have to pay up front. They're like, hey, we'll give you a loan. You'll pay us back after the war. We'll lend these weapons to you, basically. So they don't need to pay cash. And it helps the Allies a lot, and it helps the American economy even more. They're grinding out all these weapons. Everyone's getting a job. It's great. And then there's the Atlantic Charter. And this is Winston Churchill and FDR chilling on an aircraft carrier. And Churchill is like, look, Brody, when you enter the war, we got to deal with Germany. And FDR's like, totally agree. They talk. And eventually what this is showing is that even though America is not in the war yet, if and when it ever does join the war, it will join on the side of the Allies. So that's sort of what solidifies that. So that's also really important. Now we can actually get into the good stuff, I promise. Here we go. This section right here might be the coolest part of all of APUSH. We're getting into the good stuff of World War II, starting with the absolute biggest blunder of all time. Let me give you a little tip. If you ever, regrettably, find yourself in confrontation with the United States of America, do yourself a favor and do not mess with the boats. Messing with the boats never ends up well for you, and yeah, just don't do that. And if you are going to stage a surprise attack on America's largest naval base, maybe you should at least like destroy the repair station that's right there, or maybe all of their oil reserves that are right there, or the submarine base that's right there. It was terrible attack. I mean, sure, it was like a propaganda victory, but I mean, in reality, America got its entire Navy up and running in like a few months because the repair stations were right there. And it didn't, the Pearl Harbor attack did not like cripple the American Navy in any way. It just filled us with this iron resolve, and we do what we do. So yeah, Pearl Harbor, I can only imagine Hitler picking up the phone like, wing, wing, hey, road, this is Emperor Hiroshima, whatever. It's like, we just went and we bombed America, did like no damage, and brought them into the war. Einstein fushed. It's just like, scheiße. This is bad move. Do not do that. Stupid. And then obviously the declaration of war. This is right after Pearl Harbor happened. And Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack by Japan on the United States. If you don't know what that is, you need more help than just this video. Yeah, there's the declaration of war. This is FDR being like, yesterday, or on December 7th, the United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. And yeah, he gets his declaration of war, goes to war with Japan, and then Germany and Italy, they're like, we'll be good allies and we'll declare war on America. It was basically inevitable. And yeah, so now America is fully in the war. They get the whole wartime economy rolling, and yeah, we get active. And then there's the Axis powers. So this is Germany, Italy, and Japan. They're all super militaristic. They think their race is superior, etc., etc. They're the ops. The Allies are the good guys. And then there's the Bataan Death March. And this is one of the major atrocities of World War II. When Americans were forced to surrender on the Philippines right after the start of the war, 78,000 of them were marched to death camps, where a lot of them died on the way, on the march, and then a lot more died in the camps. So this was the Japanese doing this to the Americans, so bad looks, I'm not going to lie. And then there's the Battle of the Coral Sea. And I'm going to be honest, Japan smoked our pack in the first year of the war. It was not looking good. And then there's the first 6 months. And then the Battle of the Coral Sea is the first American victory where we stopped their advance. And we're like, okay, we can do this. And then the Battle of Midway. We get the code breakers going. They're talking, they're scheming. They find out where the Japanese are going to attack. They bring everything to this island called Midway. And the Americans are freaking ready. And we sink 4 aircraft carriers. That's like their entire fleet. So in one day, we single-handedly turned the Empire of Japan from an invincible naval superpower into like Somalian pirates, basically. And yeah, Battle of Midway was huge. It's what turned the war into our favor. And yeah, just a brilliant battle overall. Huge aircraft fight. But yeah, big win for America. That's what we like to see. It was also a really good movie if you guys want to see that. And then there's island hopping. And this is the strategy, around Japan and in the Pacific, there's a gazillion islands. And unfortunately, Japan had just taken all these islands and put like 1,000 dudes on each island, and they were like, no matter what happens, fight to the death. And that's really annoying. So America just went island to island, bombarding it with battleships and then sending the Marines in. And it was just a tedious, grueling process. But slowly but surely, we keep getting closer and closer to mainland Japan. So it did work. It was just super tedious and annoying. And then there's the Grand Alliance of World War II. And this is the alliance between the United States, Britain, the Soviet Union, the big three. France is kind of like tossed off to the side because they were kind of buns in this war. But yeah, that's the Grand Alliance. The soft underbelly of Europe. This is what Churchill called Mussolini. He was like, oh, look, instead of invading through France, let's invade through like Italy or North Africa or like Germany, or sorry, not Germany, or like Greece. This is where like the weakness is. We shouldn't go for Germany. We should go for all the weaker parts, and that's where we'll invade. And yeah, he made fun of Mussolini for like being short and whatnot, and basically being like off-brand Hitler. So that's what the soft underbelly was. And then there's Dwight D. Eisenhower. He later becomes the president. He is the main general in Europe. He is one of 4 5-star Army generals in the United States Army. Everyone calls him Ike. And when he ran for president, his slogan was, everybody likes Ike. Everyone likes Ike. He's a dog. He's a great president. Everyone really loves him. And he led the Allied invasion of North Africa and later commanded the D-Day invasion and was the primary general for the European theater of war. He was just a straight dog. He was smoking on Nazi pack everywhere he went. So big shout out to my boy Ike. And then there's the D-Day invasion. This is Ike's masterpiece. A bunch of deception went into this, but after years and years of planning, they found the place. They sent the amphibious landing assaults. We took the beach. My great-grandfather died taking that beach. What a guy. Shout out my great-grandfather. Shout out to everyone who fought in World War II. Shout out to everyone who died. Really amazing stuff. But yeah, D-Day, huge American victory. We established a beachhead on France, and from there it's just about barbecue chicken. We sweep through France, we get to Berlin, and it's all wraps. So that's the West, right? D-Day happens on the West, and then we start pushing into Germany. On the East, remember Hitler invaded Russia, and he's sieging 3 big cities, Leningrad, Stalingrad, and Moscow. If he can take those 3 cities and push the Russians back, it's bad news for them. And Hitler would probably win the war in the East. But the surrender of Stalingrad, there's like this 8-month, year-long sieges of Leningrad, Stalingrad, terrible, civilians dying, it's all bad. Like, we're talking millions of deaths. The Russians really had it bad. But yeah, after like a really long siege, the Russians are pincer and they surround this big German army, and it's like hundreds of thousands of Germans are forced to surrender. It's massive. It turns the tide of the war in the East, and it's what allows the Russians to start coming this way. So we have both of them pushing in on Germany. It's like what happened in World War I, and eventually we get there and we win. So it's pretty rad. And then there's the Holocaust. Yeah, if you don't know what the Holocaust is, that's bad looks. This is Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question. The Jewish question is basically like, oh, what should we do with the Jews? And Hitler's like, oh, wait a minute, I got an idea, let's kill them all. And so then he does the Holocaust, and yeah, that's what he does. He kills as many Jews as he can. It's really just despicable and evil. He like puts them to work, but instead of making all of them work as slaves, he just kills them. It takes effort to kill them. It stops them from working. Like, he cared about killing Jews more than he cared about winning the war, and it's really despicable stuff. So yeah, not good looks for Hitler. But yeah, we take big dubs in the war. I'm sorry to the Jews. Love all my Jewish homies, but yeah, big dubs in World War II. Okay, now we're moving towards the home front, the domestic side. We're looking at these initiatives and organizations that help improve the efficacy with which we fought the war on the home front and produced all the stuff, whatnot. Starting with the War Production Board, these are basically the guys, and they're like, hey, you're going to build tanks, you're going to build airplanes, you're going to make soup, it's going to be here at this time, I want this many of them, etc. So they were overseeing the actual manufacturing of all of the things needed to wage a war. They're like, you used to build cars, now you're going to build tanks. Thank you. That was the War Production Board. And then there's the Office of Price Administration, which was anti-price gouging, trying to control inflation, and it regulated a bunch of wages, rents, etc. So it's like rent can't be higher than this, the price of butter can't be higher than this, to try to prevent the economy from spiraling out of control as it does in wartime. In peacetime, this is stupid, but in wartime, it makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I'm a little sick. And then there's rationing. So they're like, hey, let's start rationing all of our essential things, like gas, food. We'll give you stamps so that you can see how much you're allowed to buy. That way we can send as much as we can to our boys who are fighting the war. And yeah, they started rationing all their stuff. The War Labor Board. This was created to mediate labor disputes between the strikers and the employers. If you remember, ever since the Gilded Age, we've had unions fighting the employers. It's been like this. And now FDR is like, shut up and lock in. And they do for the most part. It's like when you're beating up your brother and you see your mom coming by and you guys both stop and you're just like, hey, mom. And you're like, nothing's happening over here. Mom is like World War II, and you and your brother are like the employer and the unions, right? They were beating each other up. They stopped because World War II comes by, and then they just beat each other up right after. But, yeah, so they take a quick break from the strikes and whatnot for the war. Shout out to my homies. Growth of the West as a result of wartime industry. Because Japan is off the coast of California, a lot of federal allocation, like most of the federal funds went to California. And beforehand, California had like 10 electoral votes, and then everyone moved there because that's where all the federal money was. That's where the war against Japan was being staged. So this is when the growth of California happens. So that's big. Demographic changes in the South. The South starts to industrialize. They sort of start to shift away from their agrarian economy towards the industrial society because they need to keep up with quotas and whatnot to, help the war effort. They still remain poor and worse off, but this provides a lot of opportunity for blacks in particular to get factory jobs, get good jobs. Yeah, big moves, big ups for the West, or for the South, sorry. Union membership during wartime. Union membership skyrocketed all the way up to 15 million. 15 million people were in unions. It was pretty crazy. It's because they weren't allowed to strike. FDR was like, hey, you can join a union, but no striking, and they were like, okay. But yeah, FDR super approved of unions because he needed all the workers he could get to build all of his big bad tanks. Office of War Information. This is like the propaganda board thing from World War I, except they focused more on like radio and film more than posters, but they did make some posters. Eventually it was cut because it was like glazing FDR too much, and the House Republicans were like, all right, this is getting out of hand. But yeah, Office of War Information, they're kind of like just, the propaganda people from World War I. And then there's the Victory Gardens, and this is FDR telling everyone, please start planting your own gardens, growing as much food as you can. That way we can keep all of our like industrially produced agriculture and send it to our soldiers. And yeah, everyone had their little garden. And it was pretty sick. It'd be like, oh, I'm hungry. Let me go get some carrots from my garden instead of going to the grocery store. That way they could save that food for the soldiers. It was pretty effective. And these were the efforts on the home front that made us super effective at fighting the war in Germany, fighting the war in Japan, freed up all of our resources. And this is what total war looks like. This is like using everything we can to fight a war. It's pretty awesome. We're the best in the world. Shout out America. All right, now getting into the DEI stuff, we got Rosie the Riveteer, or like the woman in the workforce lady. And so during World War II, as all the men left to go do work and like fight the war, a bunch of women had to come in and fill these factory jobs, build planes, build tanks, etc. They were a huge help to the war effort, and we probably could not have won without them because they built all this stuff. And Rosie the Riveteer was like the iconic symbol of the women in the workforce, women making money, women being the heads of their family while their husbands were gone, etc. So it's like a symbol of women empowerment. Shout out all my girls. Women in the workforce, post-war status. This is really important. We see all the guys come back from World War II, and they're like, all right, go back to being trad wives again. And the women are kind of like, wait, I low-key like working though. And so it's a turning point where women start to be more active in the economy. They start to be more active and independent in their family, be more independent politically. So this is a turning point for that. The end of the New Deal. World War II brings the end of the New Deal. Like, there's no more need for the New Deal because the wartime economy is going so ballistic, nuts, whatever. It's like, why do you need the Civilian Conservation Corps when you can just send all those like young men off to war? So the New Deal, we don't need it anymore. New Deal is done. It's wartime economy now. The GI Bill of Rights. This is or the Servicemen Readjustment Act. This is for World War II veterans returning home at the end of the war. It gives them things like tuition assistance for college, low interest home mortgages, unemployment benefits. It helps expand the middle class a lot and helps out the veterans who are coming back home. The Barcero Program. This was a labor agreement between the U.S. and Mexico in 1942, and this program allowed for Mexican workers to temporarily come live in America to help produce agriculture, manufacture tanks, etc., all this stuff. And then, obviously, when a large ethnic group that is not Anglo comes into America, there's a nativist response. The Chicano culture is what it was called, and this is the Mexican heritage that they brought with them. And then the Zoot Suit Rights, this is the response to the Chicano culture. This is the response to the Barcero Program. This is all the white people in LA saying, or like California saying, why are there so many Mexicans here? I don't like that. And yeah, so the Mexicans would wear these things called Zoot Suits, and then there's a race riot, and they were called the Zoot Suit Riots. Reflects racial discrimination against Mexicans. And then there's the Navajo Code Talkers. Jesus. These boys are straight ballers. They were using their native Indian language, which is one of the last ones alive that is native to North America, and it was an unbreakable code. The Japanese couldn't break it, and there weren't that many of these guys, but it was super important, like literally crucial role. It's because they went behind the back of the U.S. government and still spoke their language even after the Dawes Act told them they couldn't. So big shout out to the Navajo Code Talkers. Really great. They fought with the Marines in the Pacific, not with the Germans in Europe, or not against the Germans in Europe. The Nice. So these are like Japanese Americans who are American citizens, full American citizens, which means they should get all the rights of American citizens. But they face discrimination because World War II broke out, and obviously they're fighting the Japanese, so they were often suspected of like treachery, potential sabotage, and this fear led to the Japanese relocation into internment camps, also known as Executive Order 9066. And this was the forced relocation of 120,000 Japanese Americans, primarily from like California and the western coast where, the Japanese might invade from. And it was due to fears of espionage and sabotage. But there was no real evidence. It was just kind of like baseless, like, you don't like Japanese people. And then there's the Korematsu versus U.S., and this is trying to overturn. They're like, hey, this is not constitutional. You can't put us in internment camps. And the Supreme Court said, actually, we can. We are in a time of war. The government can do whatever it wants. Freak you. It's pretty widely looked upon as a pretty severe violation of human rights. Migration patterns during World War II. Black people, once again, leaving the South, going north. That's the Second Great Migration. And then a lot of people moving west. You got to think lots of migration from the Midwest to the West, like California. People moving from like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, moving out to California. People from Texas moving out to California because that's where all the money is going to fight the war against Japan. A lot of movement west and a lot of movement north. South doesn't really get a whole lot of love. Second Great Migration, this is over 1 million African Americans moving from the south to the north, just like they did the first time, to get all those juicy factory jobs that are up there that were left, because African Americans cannot yet fight in the front lines. They are not allowed to do that until 1945. Next, we got blacks in the military. So even though the military was segregated until 1945, meaning that blacks cannot fight on the front lines until the very end of the war, over 1 million African Americans still enlisted, doing things like drivers, secretaries, non-combative roles. So shout out to those guys, shout out to those brothers. Huge contributions. Really sorry about the segregation. That's on us. The Double V campaign. So this was what the African American soldiers were fighting for. They were fighting for a V victory abroad, victory against Hitler, victory against the Japs, and V victory for victory at home. Victory for civil rights, They were highlighting the end of segregation. They really wanted to show the hypocrisy of African Americans going to fight for liberty while still facing segregation back at home. And then there's increased membership in the NAACP, which is, the National African American something or another. The NAACP membership surged as African Americans sought to challenge the segregation that they saw. Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, was founded in 1942. It was a nonviolent resistance group against racial segregation, and it played a huge role later down the line in the civil rights movements of the 50s and the 60s. So this is like laying the groundwork for that. And then there's Executive Order 8802, not to be confused with Executive Order 9066. This was issued by FDR in 1941 that banned racial segregation in defense industries. Are you a waiter? Oh, well, you can still be segregated. Are you building a tank? Then there's no more segregation. FDR knew what was up. He said, we need to get those brothers working. We need those equal conditions because we cannot have segregation for the brothers building the tanks. We need those things built ASAP. And so, yeah, shout out to FDR for ending all that. Okay, I did just realize that I forgot to talk about A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters, which is a mouthful. This is from the last section, but A. Philip Randolph is just the leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and he was the guy who pushed for Executive Order 8802. So he was an African American labor leader. That's all that you need to know about him. But now, here we are, 2 sections left, and we're finally getting into some more good stuff. The defeat of Hitler. So as the Allies were closing in on Germany from both sides, as we were talking about before, Hitler decided to take his own life in a bunker, allegedly, on April 30th of 1945. Shortly afterward, Soviet forces went and occupied Berlin, and the Nazi war effort was over, and the war was won in Europe. The death of FDR happened just before the death of Hitler. He had led the United States since 1932 or 1933, took us out of the Great Depression, led us to victory in World War II, died of a stroke on April 12th. His death left Vice President Harry Truman to make critical wartime decisions, including whether or not to use the atomic bomb, but shout out FDR, you're a goat, don't care what Ben Shapiro says, you are a great president. VE Day. This is the Victory in Europe Day, hence the E, and it was officially observed on May 8th of 1945 and marked the formal surrender of the Nazi Germany to the Allies, and it ended the war in Europe. With Hitler dead and Berlin occupied, occupied by the Soviet forces, Germany had no choice. They were beat. They were spent. So that's VE Day, the Manhattan Project. This is the creation of the atomic bomb. Super top secret. Nobody knew this was happening. But yeah, this FDR authorized it, and they successfully created the atomic bomb, and that's what the Manhattan Project is. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is Harry Truman deciding these freaking Japs won't give up. A little bit of coercion might help them. And so he drops 2 suns on Japan at Hiroshima and at Nagasaki, and it just kills everybody. So yeah, and then a few days after that, Japan surrenders. VJ Day. This is Victory in Japan on August 15th of 1945, and it marked Japan's unconditional surrender to the Allies, officially ending World War II. This is right after the atomic bombs, but actually America isn't that harsh on Japan, and then we make them one of our good allies, and now they're a super awesome, rad first world country. So, pretty good. We are finally at the end, and I'm more excited than all of you. I mean, it is sad. This is the end of the greatest unit in APUS history, but I do have European history stuff to do. I don't know how I always have European history stuff to do after this. It's like Miss JP pulls up the calendar and is like, Gideon has to make a video that night. Let's make a major assignment due then. Like, thank you, Miss Johnson Petronic. But yeah, last little section, the big 3. This is the 3 main Allied leaders during World War II. So that's Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States of America, and Joseph Stalin of the USSR. And they held several different meetings to talk about the post-war world, how it would look, talk about the economics, the security, how they would divvy up all the winnings, etc. The biggest one, or one of the biggest ones, is the Potsdam Conference. This is held right near Berlin. Stalin, Truman, and Churchill, this is after Roosevelt had died, but the leaders agreed on a military administration for Germany, basically how they would cut up Germany. Everyone got a little piece of Berlin. America got South Germany. UK got Western Germany. Russia got Eastern Germany. So they just divvied up Germany amongst themselves. They agreed to prosecute Nazi war criminals, and made some territorial and political exchanges. And then the Yalta Conference. This one was big. This is Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin discussing Europe's post-war structure. Stalin secured control over all of Eastern Europe all the way up to Germany. So when you see the USSR and you see how it extends all the way from Moscow to East Germany, that's why, because of the Yalta Conference. Stalin promised that he would do free democratic elections, which he did not do. But he also promised to join the war against Japan, which he did do. And this marked the peak of Allied cooperation, so big ups at the Yalta Conference. And then there's the Bretton Woods Conference. This was held in 1944 to talk about the way the world would work economically after the war. It made the US dollar the primary international currency, which would be tied to gold, and it created financial institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF to promote stability and prevent economic crisis like the Great Depression from happening again. The United Nations, this is the pinnacle of Allied efforts to create a unified global governmental body. It's basically the successor to the League of Nations, except America actually joins it this time, so the UN does hold a lot of power. It includes a General Assembly where all of the member nations, so every country in the world, comes in and is able to have a voice, and then also a Security Council that has 5 permanent members. The US, the United Kingdom, USSR, now Russia, China, and France. And they all had veto power. And the UN Charter emphasized peaceful conflict resolution and international collaboration. So it's just like the League of Nations if it actually happened. Then there's the Atlantic Charter. Again, don't know why it's on here. We already talked about it. But this is FDR and Churchill on the aircraft carrier talking about how they would become allies if America were to join the war. But they also talked about other things like self-determination, improved economic and social conditions, kind of contrary to the imperialistic nature of the past. So yeah. Pretty huge. Yeah. And this is it. This is World War II. Amazing unit. You guys got this test. It'll be, y'all got it. Rock this. Super interesting stuff. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later, and good luck. Oh, and vote for Gideon. Vote for Gideon Mike Ol Hock. Vote for me. Because I'll bring you the most rad Shap recaps and most hype pep rallies. I swear, I promise. All right. Bye now.